Live video broadcast will begin soon. I am screen sharing now. What's it showing? I am screen sharing now. What's it showing? Microphone. I am screen sharing now. Hello?
It works.
I'm sorry?
It works.
Works?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is it showing my face? Why are you showing my face? Huh. All right. I don't have a connector, and the ones that's here is broken. Actually, no, actually might work. Let me try it. Maybe they fixed it. No, they didn't fix it. All right. There we go. All right, we'll use this instead. All right, so up to this point, we've been, welcome back. Up to this point, we've been working on the client side quite a bit, right? We've been creating AngularJS. We're using AngularJS templates, controllers, and services, right, to create a prototype that runs exclusively on the client, right? We've only been using the server very in a limited sense, only to serve up all this static content, right? To serve up our CSS, our HTML, our JavaScript, but mostly serve up static text content that then is interpreted by the browser, right? And within the browser, the JavaScript takes control, the AngularJS library takes control, and then dynamically renders everything, right? It handles events that are generated by the user, right? And it converts them into actions that manipulate the data model, right? And we saw that AngularJS maintains a two-way binding so that whenever a controller makes changes to the model, the view is then updated, right? We saw that if we manipulate an array, right, and we add to the array, this is immediately reflected in the UI, right? And if we do something in the UI, again, it's reflected in the controller and vice versa, right? So, so we're going to be moving a lot of that functionality, a lot of the data that is being used by the prototype that we're building, we're going to move that to the server side, right? So instead of hosting it, it's still going to be mock data, right? It's still going to be fake data, static data, but instead of hosting it on the client, like we've been doing in the services, we're going to move that to the server, right? So we're going to, and instead, we're gonna rewrite the services so that they will go and fetch the data from the server, right? And the server will expose the data using a RESTful web API, right? So if we'll create several URL routes, right? That whenever we hit those routes, the server will respond with data. We'll start with hard-coded data, arrays of courses, for instance, right? Up to this point, that's the example we've been showing in class. But instead of it being the services on the Angular services providing that mock data to the rest of the application, we're gonna go and fetch it from the server, right? And retrieve it in the Angular side for rendering. So we're gonna rewrite our client services to talk to server-side services, right? We already played around a little bit with the server-side services on Monday, right? We wrote a couple of URLs, a couple of simple services that allowed us to get, right, individual pieces of text, individual pieces of JSON snippets, right? Arrays, and we were doing that from the URL, right? We pasted the URL, then we retrieved the data. So we're going to expand on that and write an Angular service, right? An Angular, small Angular application that can interact with these backend services. Okay. So let's see. Let me start this off. CS. Oh, oops. CD CS. Well, I'm gonna start off the server. Oh, wow, there's a little delay, huh? I'm going to start off the server, and I've put the examples that we went over in class, excuse me, on the portal. So you should be able to see all the various examples, code, and snippets that we worked on last Monday. And it's and you're going to be able to find that under a new tab under the server-side development. If you click here on weeks 6 to 8, view more, you come here and you have all the lectures. Here are several videos that you can watch on how to work with Node.js, how to create web services, create RESTful web APIs. So take a look at those videos, and then there's a tab here that if you go into the Express tab is going to be all the examples, right, that we worked on Monday, right? And under there, you'll see the source code for all these, right? And some explanation on how they work. There's a drop down on the examples. If you go in there, that will show you how to create a simple hello world. Let me go fetch a simple string, a simple JSON object. Let me fetch an array. Okay. Let me fetch something with a parameter, a path parameter. So take a look at these examples, and no, they cover the various topics we worked on Monday, right? So it's available here. What we're going to be doing today, we're going to expand on some of this, and on Monday we just created the URLs, right? We just fetch the data. We type the URL at the input field at the top, right? The URL field in the browser. Let's expand on that and actually create an Angular application that fetches all this data back and forth and renders it on the UI. Okay. All right. So let me go and so let's create an Angular application that uses a service that goes and fetches data from the server, right? A Node.js server that uses Express.js that exposes a URL, a web API that we can retrieve data from. Okay. So I'm going to create a directory under this lectures directory, and I'm going to call it Angular.js client. Okay. So this client, I'm going to put in here both the server that exposes data, and I'm going to also write the Angular client that goes off and retrieves data from this server. So let's first create our server. So we'll say so this is we're going to call it our server. In our server, we're going to create a module here. We're going to say module dot exports, and we're going to call here function. Yes. I'm sorry.
You can see what you're doing.
Yeah, I am. It's just a little delayed.
Okay.
It's a little delayed. Sorry.
Can you show your screen?
I don't have a connector
Okay.
to my screen. That's why I'm going through this loop. This is a very winded loop that goes all the way to YouTube and then back to us. Yeah, these are broken. Okay, so here, so this module is where I'm going to put all the code that's going to expose our data, right? So let's create a couple of how about we're exposed users, right? Users, and so let's create a couple of users here, right? We'll say var users, and we're going to just create an array of users and several users under here, and eventually you'll catch up. And so we'll create a couple here. So we'll create one with a first name will be Alice. Last will be Wonderland, and username will be just Alice, and maybe an email. It'll be maybe alice@wonderland.com. Okay, and I'm just going to copy this user a couple of times, and maybe we'll call this Bob, and Charlie, and Dan. Now, I'm just creating an array of several users. Will be Bob, Bob Marley, Charlie Garcia, and Dan. And the usernames, I'll put maybe Charlie. There we go. And I'll leave the email. Let's see, maybe it would be Bob@Wonderland, be Charlie@Wonderland, and Dan@Wonderland. All right, so we have users. We have an array of users. Oh, I think I have a syntax error here. Let me fix that. These are all objects. All right, so we have an array of objects, and I'm fixing a couple of syntax errors. I was missing some curly brackets for these objects. So yeah, so this data typically would be hosted and persisted in a database, right? But we don't have that just yet. So for now, this is going to be our mock data, right? Our sample data, and we want to expose this, right? So if somebody asks for users, we would expect that they would use a URL such as /API/user, right? If they don't ask, they're not asking for any particular user, meaning they don't provide an index or an ID. We're going to assume that they want all the users, right? So let's do that. And if you remember, we used Express to do that, right? Now this particular module is running inside of a server that is already up and running, right? So we can't start another server in here, right? If this were a standalone server, that's fine. We can instantiate Express right here, right? We can require express and whatnot. But we already have a server up and running that is hosting the whole portal, right? So we're gonna use that server, right? And I'm gonna pass it as arguments to this module. We're gonna pass it the application instance that was created, right, from loading Express, right? When we instantiated Express, we're gonna pass it as an argument in that function that instantiates this module. Okay. There we go. So once we have that app instance, right, we can create all the routes, right, that can expose the data. We can say app dot. We can say, if we provide a get URL, right, a get request on a URL such as API/user, then we're going to respond, right, with the entire array, right, as a JSON object, right? So be app.get, right, the URL, API/user, responding to the request, and the response will say response sent back to JSON, return all the user arrays. Okay, right? Everybody okay with that? Right. All right. So we have to link this to the overall server that is hosting this, right? So let's go back to our overall server that's somewhere down here. There it is. Okay, we're going to. So this is the base server, right? That it is requiring Express, is instantiating the application that is requiring the body parser, creating the IP address, right, and setting public to be the public. Right there, this is it, right, and to link this top level server, right, this top level server that is loading the Express, right, the library and whatnot, we're going to require, right, the module we just created, right, which I believe we put it under public. I think it's under lectures, and I think we called it under Node.js, and then under, I think it's called AngularJS client, I believe it was, and under there we have server.js, right? And we're going to pass it as argument the actual application, right? So yeah, so it's more or less in the same directory as the lecture that we were working on Monday. So there it is. So Node.js, then it was AngularJS client, and then server.js. And we're going to pass this argument the app that we instantiated here, right? So instead of us doing it in our server.js, right, we have this top level server.js, right, that is creating this one single instance and passing it along to us, to our module, right? And inside our module, we'll create all these routes. Okay? All right. All right. All right. Let's restart our server and see if this is working. Right. If we hit API/user. Right. Okay, so we missed out something in the URL. We said API/user, and really it should be /API/user, right? So where it has to be absolute, right, with the root of the application. And so yeah, so we're going to put a slash at the beginning of this of API. This should say /API/user. And when we hit the URL, we should get the list the array of all users. There it is, right? So we get the array of all users. So yeah, so we got the API for that. We might also create the URL for being able to retrieve a single user, right? So for instance, we might ask for a user and then provide the ID of that user. We don't have a real ID, so we'll use the ID as an index, right? And we'll retrieve from the request params ID, and we'll use that as an index into the array, and then we can try it out by using the same URL as before, but providing an index at the end of that URL. So there it is. So we have API/user/ID. We're going to parse out that ID, right? We're going to use it as an index into the array of users. Come on, Google. Do you see this also? It's flickering also on your screens? But when it gets recorded?
Yeah.
When it gets recorded, also you see this?
Right now it's showing.
No, but I mean when it gets recorded on YouTube. It's good? It doesn't show this? Doesn't show this? Okay. All right, good. All right, there it is, right? So we provided an ID, and I'm using it as an index to retrieve that one user. All right, so we have a basis of a web API, right? Let's write the Angular client to this, right? So let's do that. Let's go back and let's write a couple of HTML, AngularJS controllers and templates, right? That are going to hit those URLs, right, and render the data on as HTML in the DOM, right? Right. So let's create here the client. I'm going to say users.html, and the users.html. I'm going to, as always, we're going to load the various libraries. Right, so we're going to go up to CSS to retrieve Bootstrap. Right, and we're going to load also the various scripts. Right, we're going to load the AngularJS script. Right. I'm loading the local version, right, because I've found several times that I'm working offline and I don't have a network connection to go and download the libraries from the CDNs, right? Certainly, it's always better, when you deploy something that is running on production, that you go out to those CDNs, right? But when you're developing, it's often very convenient, right, to have a local copy of the library. So there we go. So we go JS and we want Angular. There we go. All right, we have the script. We're going to declare this to be an Angular application, and right now we'll call it the user app, right, because we're handling users, right? Maybe a registration application, and we're going to just have a single controller, right? Because we're going to deal with just users right now, right? So I'm going to create here a controller, and it'll be the user controller. We're going to have a div that has a container, and we're going to just have h1. We're going to have users, and we're going to display just users. All right, and let me move the controller down to the div. There, so we have the outer ng application, right? User app. We're going to create a controller called user controller, and this controller is going to go out and fetch the data, right, from the server, right? right now we're going to have the controller fetch the data. Okay, but a better implementation is to have a service fetch the data. Right. First, let's do it in the controller. Right. Let's do it in the controller. There's less less thing to deal with. Let's implement it in the controller just because it's convenient, right? But a better implementation would be to put this in a service. We'll do that in a minute. Right? So first, let's see how you would do it in the controller. So we have here function. We can have a function or single immediately invoked function, and here we have Angular dot module is going to instantiate the user app and is going to have no dependencies, and also it's going to declare our single controller, say controller, and also for convenience purposes, right? I'm putting it in a single file. The JavaScript is in one single file, and the HTML is in a single file, right? But a better implementation would be to do what? Split it, right? Put the JavaScript in a separate file, right? But again, for convenience purposes, we're going to keep it here. So we're going to have user controller, and then we're going to have a function that implements this. Function user controller. And let's test whether this works. By sending some text back to the client, some hello world, to see if this works. So we'll say hello from user controller, and we'll say hello in the template to see. All right, so in the controller, we're going to load up the scope. Now, what's the scope? The scope is the container, right? That container is the scope. So that any variables that we declare on the server, on the controller, or we declare on the template, rather tied to one another, right? Whatever happens to that variable happens to the controller, and vice versa. Okay. So if we go and go to that that HTML, which lives where? Let's say it's under lectures, Node.js, Angular client, right? So it's lectures, Node.js, Angular client, users. I mistyped something, and wait a minute, I mistyped something. Lectures, Node.js, lectures, Node.js, Angular client, users.html. Did I stop the server? Lectures. Public lectures / Node.js, lectures, Node.js, Angular client, Angular.js client. Ugh. I hate computers. They're so literal. I take everything so literal. They do everything exactly as they're told. Not for much longer, maybe. So there it is. So it says hello from user controller. So the controller sends a text back to the template, and the template renders that message. So yeah, so we have it working, right? So hello from user controller. So let's go fetch data from the server. Right? We want to go fetch data, that array that is hosted at the server that we already tested that it works. Right? We want to do that programmatically. Right? We want to programmatically go fetch that data. So let's do that. Right? So to do that, we're going to make use of another service called the HTTP service. right? Just like there's the $scope service that allows you to interact with the DOM. Well, the $HTTP service allows us to interact with the server. Okay, the $scope allows us to send data back to the client for rendering. The $HTTP allows us to send requests back to the server, allows us to send GET requests, POST requests, PUT. Right. So let's do that. So inside of the controller, we'll use the HTTP GET, right? And we will use the same URL we would type at the URL field in a browser. We'll type it here. We'll say looking for API user, and if the request is successful, it will send us a response. All right, will send us a response. Right, and it will call us back. Right, very much like jQuery's Ajax. Right, you provide a success function, right, and that success function will be invoked if the request is successful. Okay, so here the way it's done is we have $HTTP and then .get, meaning we're fetching data. We're using an HTTP GET, right, on this URL. And if it's successful, it will call us back in the function that we are providing, right? And it will call us with the response, the result. Right now, we're just displaying in the console. HTTP, the service, not only does it have .get, it also has .post, .put, .delete, right? All the various HTTP actions, right, that we can interact with the server, right? Right. So if we try this out, right, and we look at the response that comes back, right, and we reload this, right, we'll notice that that URL is actually going to be in the network, right, request, just like we request Bootstrap as a resource and we request Angular as a resource, right? What do we request that from? The page is requesting it from where? From the server, right? That's where it lives. It requests the CSS, it requests the JavaScript. Now programmatically is requesting something else, right? Not from a link or script tag, but programmatically from JavaScript. JavaScript is dynamically sending this URL and indeed is responding, right? And it's responding with this this is the raw text that comes back, right? Notice that it comes back. Notice the request. Right, this is the raw. If you click on the response tab, you'll see the raw text that comes back from the server. And if instead you click on the headers, you'll see the actual URL that was used to invoke the request. Okay. All right. So what do we do on the client? Now that we have the data, right? How do we render it? Well, we use the same mechanism that we've been using so far, right? We use the scope, right? We use the scope, right? Just like we say scope.hello and we send the text, we can send entire JSON objects, right? Or entire JSON arrays, right? So our variables here, we can say, we can display users. Right, we can use the scope, right, to say scope.users equal the response, right? And that way we are sending the response to the client. We're creating a variable called users, right, on the client, and in the template, right, and the template using the curly brackets, right, can display this content. There it is, right? So notice that the first text is just hello, right, and the second one is the array, right, JSON representation. And we already know how to render this, right? We could render this as a table, we've done this before. We can use HTML templates, right, to render this, right? We can create a table. And then render it as a let's see, first name, last name. Let's just render the first and last for now. Right, we can create a row, right? We can create a row for every element in that array, right? We can use ng repeat to iterate over the users, for each user in the array of users, right? And create a table data, right, for each instance of the user. Right, so there it is. So we have, we're going to copy and paste this table row over and over for each instance of user in users, and use the template, the curly brackets, to fetch, each single field inside of the user instance. Right. So if you render this in HTML and look at the actual rendering of the HTML, it'll render as a table with the rows, one per row. Okay. So there. So we've gone off, right? So we've written something that the client doesn't know any data, right? As to go out to the server to fetch the data, right? Right. Just in our first prototype, right? We had the data hard coded in HTML, right? We then moved that away from HTML. We moved it into Angular, right? So we dynamically generated this. Now we're going to move it back to the server, right? And eventually, where is that going to live? It's going to live where it should be, right? It should live on the database, right? That's our last, endpoint of where we want to reach, right? So we're pushing it back and back and back into the tier that it belongs to, right? But for fast prototyping, right, you can create mock data real quick, right, and get something up and running just to illustrate, to do some prototyping to see if it works, right? No point in making all the effort on creating the guts, right, if the skin doesn't work, right? Okay, so we have that. So what we want to be able to do is be able to, update or delete or create new instances, right? So let's create here. Something real simple that we can do is create maybe like a button that allows us to delete a particular instance, right? So what we could do here is create a button that that if we click on it, it'll remove the that particular user, right? So we'll say we use the glyphicons. Remove the particular elements, right? So we'll create a button, and the last column we'll create a button at the end, the last column, so that if we click on it, it'll go off and notify the controller that we want to remove that particular user. Okay. So we'll say, if we click on it, we're gonna send a delete event handler. We're going to go to the controller and say we want to remove this particular user. Okay, so for that, we need to go back to our controller and create an event handler. We're going to say, if they call the delete and they pass us the user that they want to remove, we'll need to notify the server that, we don't have the data model, right? We don't have any of the data. We're going to have to, who has that? The server has the data model, right? We're going to have to go back to the server and say, hey, they want to remove this particular user, right? So first we need to know either the ID or the index of where this user, which user are you trying to remove, right? So we'll fetch, we'll see what's the index of the user. To do that, we can go back to the list of users that we have already in scope and find out this particular user that you want to remove. Which one is it? Is it the first user? Is it the second user? Which one is it, right? So that we can notify the backend saying that, oh, they want to remove the first, second, or third user in the array, right? Right. So we can say, there it is. So here's the event handler delete. It's a function that it receives the instance of the user that is we want to remove. We're going to search, with that user, where is it located in the array of users, right? And then we're going to send to the server. We're going to say, http.delete, right? Remember, the HTTP service not only does it have .get, right? It has .delete, .post, .put. We can send various types of commands. The URL is going to be the same, API/user. That's very important, right? All these calls use exactly the same URL, right? The way that the server distinguishes which one do you mean is because they are all the same, different type, right? Some of them are gets, some of them are puts, some of them are deletes, right? Some of them are posts. That's how the server distinguishes, even though it's the same URL, which one do you mean? But in this case, the URL is slightly different, right? Because not only is it the URL, we're also going to provide the index, right, of which user do we want to remove. So we already calculated the index. We're going to append the index to the end of the URL. We're going to say, API/user/ and then the index, right? And that's going to be passed over to the server. The server will parse out the index and then remove the correct user. Make sense? Right? Right. So it's going to send out a delete. If it's successful, it'll call us back with a response. And for convenient purposes, the delete is going to respond with the remaining users, right? Minus the one we removed, right? So the only thing left to do is to update the users variable, right, in the Angular users variable with their new response, right, which includes all the users minus the one we just removed, right? So yeah, so if it's successful, it'll pass us the response. Hopefully, it'll be an array of users. Notice that if we try this now, the server is going to complain, right? It's going to complain saying, I don't have a route, right, that responds to a delete on /API/users. I don't have a route for that, right? We have to write it, right? So let's go write it on the server. So on the server, right, on the server, we only have two get, right? One that retrieves a single user and one that retrieves all the users. We have two get, right? We don't have a delete, so let's write the delete. So we're going to have the we're going to have the same URL, but we're going to have the ID at the end, right? Just like that get, right? Very, very similar to that get, but instead of being a dot get, it's going to be a dot delete. Okay. We're going to parse out the ID from the parameter, and we're going to splice out. We're going to splice out that that user from the array, and then respond with the remaining list of users. We're going to say users dot. I want to splice out the user at that index, right? And I want to remove just one, and I want to respond with the remaining user, right? So basically, we're doing mostly the same thing we're doing at the client, right? But where are we doing this? We're doing it at the server now, right? We're doing this at the server. Now, the server has its own life cycle, right? In that, any variables that you declare globally on the server will stay with it, right? Will have the same life cycle as the server, right? So that if you come back later, if the server's still there, RAM has been allocated to host all this data. So there it is. So we've spliced it out, and we're going to return it. Let's load the reload the UI. If we try to click on this, right, the server is going to not work because it generates this delete, but the server doesn't know about it, right? Even though we wrote it, the server, we have to restart the server, right, for it to be aware of this. So let's stop the server, and let's restart the server, and let's try it again. Right. Notice that now if we click on the X, it will go off, generate the delete request, right? And then it will splice out that particular element, right? And then respond with the array. So there it is. So we restart the server and click on the X next to the user that we're deleting. It responds with, there it is. So we removed Alice, and if we can remove Dan, Bob, and Charlie, and you'll see that the element is removed, the row is removed, and it is re-rendered, right, with the missing user. All right. Right. So there we go. We've done what? We've done get all, right? And we did a delete one, right? How about let's create a new one, right? Let's create a brand new one. So to do that, on the UI, we need to create some kind of form, right, that allows us to post new members, right? So we're going to create right underneath the first row. We're going to create another row that has a couple of input fields, right? And the input fields, I'm going to tie them to the controller using ng model, right? We're going to say new user, just the user dot first, and same thing for the last name, user last. So I'm tying them to a data model in the controller, right? And I'm going to add to the end of the last column, I'm going to add a button that if I click on it, I want to notify the controller in a function called add, right? When it gets called, it'll send a post to the server, right? Glyphicon plus right? So just like we had a just like we had a delete event handler, we're going to have to create an add event handler, right? We're going to have to, right, when we click on this button, it's going to have a plus sign at the end, right? There it is, plus. It's going to pass the user that we created in the ng model. There it is, right? So we're creating an object, right? We created an object that has two properties, right? The first and the last name. Yes. Right. We're going to create an event handler that's going to receive this add when I click on the add. So we're going to say scope add is going to receive a user object that's going to be a new user that we want to add, right? So to do that, to pass this data back to the server, we're going to use the HTTP. When we want to create data, we use the post HTTP verb, right? When we want to remove, obviously it's delete. We want to get stuff, obviously it's get. But when we want to create, we use the post. We want to update, we use put. Okay, so HTTP post, the same URL, right? API / user, right? But we're going to add one more thing to the URL, right? Well, I'm sorry, no, the URL says /API / user, but the post method allows it to pass data along, right? Not only just the URL, but also data. The data will be encoded in the body of the HTTP request, right? In this case, what we're posting, the data that we're posting is the new user, right? So yeah, so we'll say comma and then user, and that's the data that we're sending back to the server, right? If it's successful, hopefully as a response, it'll send us back all the users, all the new users, including this new user that we are adding to the data model, right? Okay. If we try this now, it's going to fail because we don't have a post on the server, right? The server is not set up to respond to a post, right? So we need to create a post URL, right? That answers to the API user, and then retrieves the new user from the body, right? The new user is embedded in the body, so we can retrieve the new user from the request in the body of the request, and then we can push the new user, right? The brand new user that we're receiving, we can push it to the array that already exists, and then respond back to the client, you know, with the entire array of all the users, which hopefully contains the new user that we posted. Notice that the user does not contain a username, right? Does not contain an email, right? That's not there. Maybe we could have here a default username or whatever, right? Or maybe we shouldn't let them unless they have a username. But let's keep it simple here. So if we restart the server, right, we'll see that and if we hit that the page, right, that allows us to interact with the user, we'll see now a form at the top, right, that has the form that has a button that allows us to click on it to add, right, to add the new user. So we have here Alice, Bob, Charlie, Dan, A, B, C, D, E. Right. So let's create here Edward Norton, and if we click on the plus sign, what will happen is that a URL, right, and programmatically it will generate a post, right, to the server. The server will receive this. Will in the request, the new object, right, of including the first name and last name will be embedded in the body, and it'll respond with the array with the new user. Notice the page is not refreshed. Okay, notice that we're not reloading anything. Right? It's not like we used to in the classical sense post a form. Right? In the classical sense, we would actually navigate right away from this page, and then some other page would be responsible for handling the post. Right? Maybe sometimes it would be the same page, right? Where the same page would have its own controller and handle the request itself, right? And then refresh the page. That was the old way of creating kind of like a single page application. .NET did a pretty good job at implementing this model, right? It almost looked like you were on the same page, right? And it maintained page statefulness, right? It had it's a whole framework, right, to maintain state in the page, right? It has its own, its own input fields where it would encode, right, the state inside of the page, so that once you submitted it, right, it would know that it's the same page and that these fields were tied to different values, right? They did a pretty good job, but again, the whole page was being reloaded. Everything was being re-rendered over here, right? Only what needs to be re-rendered. Angular is pretty good at updating only the things that need to be updated without ever leaving this page. Okay. Everybody okay? Right. We can interact, right, and still remove various elements and add new elements. Right, and again, the data model is entirely being maintained on the server. Okay, we're almost using the server as kind of like our hard drive, right? Instead of going out, the JavaScript doesn't have access to the local drive in the machine, right? Where it's being hosted, the browser's being hosted. It needs to store all its data remotely, right? Back on a server from where it was downloaded from. Okay. So we can remove, right? We can create new elements, right? And remove them. Okay, everybody okay? Everybody still with me? All right. So we're creating a UI that allows us to interact with the various CRUD operations, right? We already implemented what we did. Out of the CRUD stands for create, right? Read, update, and delete. So delete, we're done with delete. We did that. We did create, right? We did read. Well, usually there's two types of read, right? There's read all. I want to read all of them, which we did. But then there's another one, which is read one, right? And there's yet more types of read, right? We can read based on a particular criteria, yes, of which read one is one of them, right? Read by index or read by ID. I just want one, right? That uniquely identifies this particular entity, right? Or a criteria which says, users in this particular domain or particular last name or particular age or particular particular salary, whatnot, right? Particular criteria. So you can have any number of reads, right? But the two typical ones are read all, which is this, and then read one, read by ID. That's a very common one. Give me the ID. In this case, we don't have IDs, right? We have indices. So let's implement a couple more features, such as being able to select a user for update, right? So we don't have that yet, right? So let's do that. Let's do a select, and the select, what's going to do is going to go fetch that particular user, right? The one we clicked on, and put it in the form. Put it in the form for us to be able to edit it, right? Because we want to be able to update things about that user, right? So let's add in the UI the ability of selecting a user, right? So let's add an additional button at the end that that allows us to select a user. So we'll say select and that's going to notify the controller, right? Of the user that is being selected. So we're going to store it in a variable, selected user or something, right? And we're going to go fetch that particular user from the server, right? Using, again, anytime we're reading, we use what? .get, right? Anytime we're creating something new, we use .post. Anytime we're updating, we use put. We haven't used put just yet, right? But we're going to do this in preparation for the put. We're going to first fetch the user we want to update. We're going to fetch it. We're going to update the form that we want to update, yes? For the user we want to update. And then we're going to we'll write the put that updates the data in the server, right? So let's calculate the index of the one you selected on, right? It's the same calculation as before. And we're just going to keep that index around. We're going to keep around the index. Why? Because when we click on update, we need to remember, right? Which one is it that we selected, right? We need to be able to remember which one is it that we selected, right? So we'll keep it around. We're going to do a get, right? We're going to do a get that is going to retrieve from the user using the index, and in the success, it's going to send us back that one single user. And it's going to respond with that one single user, and what we're going to do is we're going to send that user that responds, that comes back. We're going to send it to the UI, right? And the UI, we already have something that can host the user first name and user last name. Which one? The form, right? The form already declares a data model called user with fields first and last. Yes, and that's exactly, it maps perfectly with the response. The response is going to come back also with an object whose properties are user first and last. Plus, it's going to have several other fields, right? Email and what else? Email, username. We're not using them, right? So we're going to send the response back to the scope.user, and that user, right? If you remember, that variable user is in the form, right? So it's going to update that form for us. It's going to update the form because, again, whatever happens to the controller happens to the UI. Whatever happens to the UI happens to the controller. Before, we use it for the create. Yes, we create on post when we click on add. Yes. What happened? We pass the user as an argument, right? And then we use that user to then post it to the back end. Here, we're doing the inverse. But we're reading from the back end, and we're updating the UI, right? So it's two-way binding. It's very nice, right? So we're sending the response back to the user, and so the form should update. Let's notice that we already had written the get operation that accepts one index, right? We already have written that, so that if we refresh, we should now see that last column not only having the delete button, right, but now an additional button that allows us to select or to edit that particular user, right? If we click on it, it should update the form. So as we click through each one of the users, we'll see that the form will be updated accordingly. Again, fetching the data from the server, right, using the get operation we had written earlier. So once it's in the form, right, as I click notice that it updates, right? Once it's in the form, we would like to be able to update it, you know, change the last name. I guess people can change last name here. And we want to be able to send our updates to the server and says, hey, you know, it changed, something's different, right? So to do that, we're going to add an additional button, right? Next to the add button, right? Next to that plus button, we're going to add another button that says, you know, maybe an update, right? And so when we click on that you know, maybe an OK button or something like a check mark, right? If we click on a check mark, then it means that yes, you want to update. This is what you want to do. The new values. So we need to create an event handler for our new update function. And and if you remember, we had stored the selected index, right, in a variable. Yes. So we can send the new data, right, to the server, and says, you know, this is the new first name, the new last name. Yes, an object that contains a new first, a new last. But we need to provide an index, right, of which one are we updating, right? Which one are we updating? So we can say $HTTP put same URL, right? API user, but we're going to add the index, right? And we had that somewhere. I think we had it under scope, selected index. I think we called it, right? Selected user index. Thank you. Select the user index. Yep. And we're going to provide the new user data, right? As a response, hopefully, it'll respond with the new list of users. Right, the new list of users in the response, right, with the new data being modified, right, the particular user with the new data. Okay, so here we have /API/user, and then scope selected user index, and then the user being passed along, right? But on the server, we don't have an update, right? We don't have a route on the server that can respond to this delete request, right? We have one for post, right? We have two for get, and we have one for delete, but we don't have a put, right? The client here is sending a put, but we're not ready in the server to receive the delete, the put command, right? So let's go on the let's go on the server, right? And write the put, right? That's going to accept the same URL, but at the end wants the ID, which is really an index for us right now. Eventually, it will be a true ID, right? A UUID, right? A good, but for now, it's just an index. Okay, so we need to again retrieve the index, right? And what we want to do is update. We say users sub index, right? We want to update the first name with the new user first, right? And the user, where is the user? It's in the body, right? So let's retrieve the user from the body. And right now we know that we are only changing the first and the last. And we're going to respond with a list of all the users. Okay, so in the UI, now we're going to have a check mark button right next to the plus button. So the plus button update creates a brand new user, right, with the data that we fill in the form. But now we're going to have a check mark, right? And what the check mark is going to do is going to send an update, right, a put request back to the server with an index saying which user are we updating and the new data for that particular user, right? And the server is going to receive this URL. It's going to parse out the ID, which we're using as an index, and take that particular user in the array and update only the first and the last, right, from the data. So we have the check mark, and so if we choose a particular user, so here, if we click on, say, Alice Wonderland, right, it's going to go out and fetch that particular user information, right, and store it in the form, and it will only live in the form for now, plus the selected user index. We have to remember which one. So if we change Alice, right, and we change Bob Doyle, and this is instead of Charlie, maybe it's Jerry. Right, so as we change Alice, right, and we update it, notice that it changed, right, and we change here Bob, and then we change Charlie. Right, every time we click on plus, it goes and puts it. We do Charlie and we change it to Jerry. We say update, right, it goes off and changes it, and it comes back with a URL with the array of the new data for those users. Does that make sense? Okay. Right. So we had said that we were going to write the dollar signs right. We want to use the $ HTTP right inside of the controller. But I did mention that that's usually a bad practice, right? To use the $ HTTP right inside of a controller, right? The reason is that you might have other pages, other controllers that might want to use these HTTP connections to the server, right? Maybe if you go to a profiles page, you want to use this, right? If you go to an admin page that administrates users, you want to use this API, right? All throughout your application, you want to interact with the user. Who's currently logged in, who's, what are their roles, what are their permissions, right? You want to have this ability of interacting with the server about users all throughout your application, all across many controllers, right? So it's usually a bad practice to have your server interaction all inside of a controller. Instead, what we should do is declare it outside, right, in a shared resource that can be then shared across several controllers, right? So let's modify this a little bit so that instead of having it here, we'll use a service, right? We'll centralize data access into a user service, right? So let's do that. So let's start with something simple. Let's first declare let's declare. Oh, wait a minute. This function controller. Okay, no. Let's go where we declare the controller and now declare also a factory that implements our service. We'll say .factory, and we'll create a user service. Okay. And our factory is going to instantiate a user service. We'll say, let's implement it here. We'll say function user service. And right now they're all in the same file, right? In the same HTML file, right? But again, this is also bad practice. Typically you want to have them in separate files, right? And then load them using this script tag, right? So no, don't declare all this in the same. I'm doing it here for academic purposes, right? It's all centralized in a single place, right? Just for convenience. So here's the user service, and the user server is going to need the HTTP service, right? Because it is going to do the communication with the server, right? We don't want the controller doing it. We want the service to be talking to the server, right? So just like the controller use the HTTP service, our service is going to use the HTTP service, okay? And it's going to declare an API with the various CRUD operations, right? So it's going to have maybe, add user, and so it's going to have an API saying where you can add a user, you can remove a user, right? The CRUD operations, right? So read. So we'll have once find all. Find all one. Find one. And then update, right? Return service. Okay, so what we're doing is we're going to create first a map, right? So that when the factory gets instantiated, right, what it's going to return immediately is a map, an object, a return object that says these are properties, these are values, property value, property value, property value. That's what it returns, right? Since you instantiate it and you have an instance of a user service, and you can say user service dot and then add or dot remove or dot whatever, right? Because they're properties, right? And you access them using just regular dot notation, yes? But these dot add or dot remove, they're actually linked to functions that live inside of the service, okay? So there they are, add user, remove user. The names don't have to match, right? These are, on the right-hand side, those are functions that are local to the service, right? That are only within the service, right? So let's implement them, right? There they are. We have a function add user. Let's do one of them. Well, let's first just declare all of them. So function remove user, function find all, function find one, and function update user. Okay? Right, so these are just local declarations of the functions, and we're returning a map. Okay. Notice that it's a good practice to declare the map right at the beginning of the function, right? So that immediately when I see the implementation of the function, right, of this factory, I immediately see the API to this factory, right? I don't have to scroll all the way down to see what is the API, right? Notice that the actual implementation are just details, right? Usually when somebody uses my API, my service, they only care about what is the map, what is the API, how do I use your service, right? I already assume that you've debugged this and it works fine and it works as advertised. I'm not going to second guess your implementation, right? As a user of your service, I only care on what the API is. So declare at the top, nice, so it's right there and then. So let's implement one of them for now. Let's implement one of them. So find all. Here's find all. And find all, what do we want to do in find all? Basically, we want to do this, right? This is what we want to do in find all. We want to do an http.get, right? http.get / API / user, right? We want to go to the server and retrieve all the users. So we already have that in the controller. The controller has that, right? So I'm going to copy it right from the controller. I'm going to move it into the service. It's the same code, right? The only difference is that the controller is concerned with updating the UI, right? Right? It's concerned with when is this loaded, right? When am I calling this, right? I'm calling it right away when the controller gets instantiated, right? That's the first thing I do, right? I call this get, right? And I have to update the UI. But once I remove it from the controller and I put it in a service, now the controller has to go through the service, right? But the service is not concerned with updating the UI, right? That's not the service business, right? The controller, the services business is talking to the server. It doesn't care about the UI, right? The controller cares about the UI. Right? The controller cares about receiving events from the UI, right? Receiving, interacting with the UI, updating the UI, fetching data from wherever, I don't know where, right? Right now it's from the server, right? It could be hard-coded, but that's the controller's business, right? Interacting with the UI. The service is not caring about the UI. The service's concern is interacting with the server. Make sense? Right. So how do we marry these two things? We need to marry these two things. Okay. So I'm gonna. So the controller needs to now go through the user service. It needs to go through the user service. So the way the way that the controller asks to it talk to a service is like it asks to talk to any service, right? Like this $scope or the $HTTP, all these are services, right? And the way it uses them, it just declares them in the parameter list, right? Well, I just created a brand new service, the user service, and the way I ask for it is declaring it in my parameter list, right? User service. Once I declare that I have access to the user service there it is. I have my user service. I want to use it. I want to call something that does like that get, right? So I'm going to cut out here that get, and I'm going to move it into the service in the find all. I'm going to put it in the find all. I'm going to put it in the find all. So I'm going to cut it out of here, right? And I'm going to move it into the find all of the user service. Right now, I need to go to the user service. I need to say user service dot all, right? And the dot all is going to go out to the server and get fetch data, right? But me as a controller, I want to be notified when the data comes back to me, right? Because I need to update the UI. The service doesn't care about this. It says, I'm going to just go fetch the data. I don't care about the UI. So the way we marry this, right, is that the controller needs to pass it, hey, notify me, pass me the data. Once I have the data, I'll update the UI. I don't care where you're getting the data from. And the service instead says, okay, I'll go fetch the data. Give me a function for me to call you back when I have the data. And then you do whatever you want with the data. It's your responsibility to do whatever you want from the data. You see that? So the way we marry this is that the controller is going to pass along a function so that it can be notified when the data comes back, right? So this function over here, right, the function in the success, right? The function in that success, right? Instead of being hard-coded in here, right, we're going to pass it as an argument. We're going to pass it as an argument so that when the service comes back with the response, it'll call our functions and notify us, right? So I'm going to remove this, remove that function, and make it an argument to the service, okay? So that now if we call user service dot all, we'll pass function with a response. And so that function there, we're going to cut it out, right? And instead of being hard-coded, right, we'll pass it as an argument. And says, well, here's a callback that I want you to call me back on, right? So it'll be an argument, it'll be an argument, it'll be an argument. And then we'll in the user service, when we call all, we'll pass that function that updates the UI, right? I'm sorry. There it is. We said user service.all, and we're passing the function as an argument. See that? And you saw that the response is going to come back to us. I'm going to say $scope .users equal response. Where's that response coming from? From the user service. The user service is going to call us back when it's done, right? Notice that we have to maintain this asynchronicity, right? Because these .success, these are all asynchronous calls, right? They have to be asynchronous. I mean, we could use synchronous calls, but consider this: if it were a synchronous call, what would happen is that we make the call, right? And if the server takes, I don't know, a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 10 seconds, the whole browser would be blocked, waiting for this response to come back. And the user's like, moving things around the browser's just not responding, right? They'll be tempted to just close you. So this is a long-running thread, right? Long-running JavaScript, right? It's not responding, it's blocked, something went wrong, right? Instead, what we do is that, you can still scroll and, and interact, select other users, right? And it responds. And the reason is that, it uses AJAX underneath, right? Just like we did AJAX with jQuery, this too is using a synchronous call AJAX called underneath. It sends the URL, but it does not wait on it, right? It tells the browser, hey browser, whenever you're done, right, call me back. Here's the function that I want you to call if you are successful. So the .success, yes, function, you can configure the function that you want to call. And that function can be a parameter, right? That callback can be a parameter. That's exactly what we're doing, right? We're passing a function as a parameter, and the .success is calling that function that we pass it, right? What is that function? Updating the UI, right? Because that is a concern of the controller, right? The service doesn't care about UIs or anything. It'll call whatever you tell me to call, right? So now that it's centralized in the user service, anybody can use this service, right? The profile controller can use this service, right? The user administrator page can use this service. Anybody can use this service by just, declaring the service as a parameter in the parameter list. Any controller. Make sense? All right. All right. So we did this. Let's do a couple more. So let's do the delete. Okay. So and let's replace each one of these. Let's replace each one of these. So in delete, we have a function, right, that receives the user. It calculates the index of the user that we want to remove. Yes. And then we have to pass. We have to tell the service, what user we're removing, and we need to then pass the callback, right, of how do we want to be notified, because we need to update the UI, right? So we have to pass two things, right? The ID or the index of the user we want to remove, and then we want to be notified, right? So we'll move the HTTP delete, right? We'll move it into the delete, into the remove user service. The index will be an argument, right? The index will pass an index. Actually, it's really an ID, right? Which we're using as an index, and the callback, right? So the callback is how we want to notify whoever called us with this remove user, right? So we can go back to the delete and use user service dot, what was it? Remove? Was it remove? Yes. We pass the index and we pass the function. So again, right, from the controller's point of view, it needs to interact with the UI by figuring out the index on where you clicked on, right? Handling the event of you clicking and on the button, on the delete button, right? So that's the controller's responsibility, right? Creating the event handling, right? Figuring out what index you clicked on. Those are all UI considerations, right? But once you figure out, what is it that you clicked on, it can convert them into into data model specific interactions, right? It can pass it along to user service, and user service, the only thing it cares is the index or the ID of the user that it wants to remove, because it needs to create a URL for that, right? It needs to create a URL, append the index or the ID, right? Do an HTTP delete to the server, and then it's going to come back with a success, right? And then in the success, we'll have what? The array of the surviving user, yes? And it'll pass it along to whoever needs it. The controller, right, receives the response, which is the list of users, and it notifies the UI with the list of users for rendering, yes? But again, that's controller specific, right? So in the controller, we have the we're calling the dot remove, right? We're passing the index, and we're also passing the function as a parameter for removal, right? Right. The functionality should still work, and we should be able to still remove a particular user, right? So if you go back, the functionality of the UI should be exactly the same, right? That should not change, right? We're just architecting it, right, so that we make it easier to manipulate, easier to modify and reuse some of these modules. Any questions so far? Right, using services. Okay, so let's do a couple more. Let's do the post. Right, so I'm going to move it from the add. Oops. We're going to move it to the create or add user function in the service. And it's going to take as argument the user object, and also is going to take as argument a callback, which we're going to use as an for the success to call back on. Okay. And in the add, we're going to use the user service dot add to pass in the user and the function that we want to notify. So there, so we moved it into the add function that is going to take as argument what? The new user being added, or the object of the user being added, and a callback, right? A function that comes. Now, callback is one of the easier ways of having UI, the controller, talk to asynchronous mechanisms, right? Like talking to the server, and it's fine. I mean, it works fine. The only problem is when once you might have several asynchronous calls, right? Maybe you're talking to one server and web API. Maybe you're talking to another web API. Maybe you're talking to 3 web APIs, right? And they're all asynchronous. You can't guarantee, right, the order in which they're going to execute, right? Or who's going to come back first. Yes? You know, say you want to, a typical example is that, I want to go to Chicago, and I'm going to need a hotel, I'm going to need an airplane ticket, and I need a car rental, right? And if I don't have all 3, I'm not going, right? I want to make sure I have all 3. So it's kind of like a transaction, right? It's either all or nothing. I want it all to be like an atomic thing, yes? And any one fails, I don't want any of it, right? So somehow I need to asynchronously wait for all of them to come back, right? And treat them as one single thing. And I can't guarantee any order in which they're all going to come back. So I want to be able to asynchronously talk to these 3 things, but I can't make a decision until all 3 come back, right? So same thing here. How would you do this here? Well, to use the mechanism that we're looking here, we would have to nest. We would have to nest these callbacks one inside of another. We call one, and then once it comes back from one, we would then call another one, right? We would have to serialize it. Yes. Well, that's not very that's not very efficient, right? You're basically throwing away the efficiency of multiple things happening simultaneously, right? Where you can in parallel have these three requests going on all at once and then come back. You're basically serializing it. You're doing one, it's asynchronous, but then when it comes back, you then do the other one, which is also asynchronous, and then you do the other one, which is asynchronous. But together, it's all synchronous, right? One after another after another. So that's not very efficient. We will look at later on when we get to databases. We'll look at other mechanisms, right? Other better ways of doing this. Which is a technique called promises. Right? Promises allows you to create APIs, right, that do the waiting for you, right? Does the synchronization for you, and once all of them come back, you give them an array of requests. Says, I want this to happen, that to happen. Once all three happen, right, notify me in a callback, right? As opposed to having three synchronous callbacks, right? I want them all to go out, but then notify me when they all come back in, right? We'll use an API a little later that does this. It's a little better to do it. Right now, it's very simple. We only have one callback. We're only talking to one API, so it's fine. Okay, for now. But later on, we'll take a look at a better way of talking to multiple UIs, right? Some of which I believe some of you are already taking a look at, talking to several APIs. Like you're talking to Yelp, you're talking to Google API, you're talking to several APIs at once, and what do you render in the UI if one of them hasn't come back yet, right? I don't know. I have the restaurant information, but I don't have its location, right? What do I render in the? And you have to synchronize them, right? So we'll come back to that topic a little later. But it's a very common problem. Anyway, so we did the add. Let's do a couple more. I believe we still have one more to do. We did all, delete. We did add. We still have to do select. So let's do update. Let's see, update. Right, we're gonna go in the update. We're gonna put it in the update user. And we need to pass as argument the index, the selected user index as argument. We need to pass also the user object with the new data and the callback, right? The user and then the callback. This is a callback. And then in the update, we're going to use the user service, service dot update. Going to take as argument the scope, select the user index. Going to take the user, right, and it's going to take as argument the function for the callback. We refresh. Let's see if we broke it. Okay, it looks like it's working. All right, so there you go. There you have it. All right, so we implemented all the various user services, right? We encapsulated it in a single reusable singleton, right? That talks to a server. We did keep it in one single page, but you should split it into various JavaScript files. And this is a technique that you're going to be using in your next assignment, which will be moving all the hard-coded data that you currently have in your assignments from your user service or your form service, right? You're going to move that to an actual server, okay? And you're going to create URLs to query for users or query for forms, right, from the server, and then rendering them, updating them in the UI. All right? Okay, thank you.